This is the very place that the renowned psychic researcher Harry Price called the most haunted house in England, Borley Rectory. The origin of the most infamous and haunting ghost stories in the history of supernatural phenomena. But before we delve into Borley Rectory, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. This helps YouTube recommend more fascinating and haunting stories to you. Now let's continue to the legend stained by tragedy of Borley Rectory. Every great ghost story needs a tragic beginning, and Borley Rectory is no exception. The house we know today was built in 1862 on land that had long been shrouded in a legend steeped in sin and death. The story goes that around the year 1362, a Benedictine monastery supposedly existed in this area. Here, a forbidden love blossomed between a monk from the monastery and a beautiful young nun from a nearby convent. Their love, forbidden by their sacred vows, forced them to meet in secret. They made plans to elope, seeking a new life beyond the cold monastery walls. But fate did not smile upon them. Their secret affair was discovered. The punishment they faced was incredibly cruel, a typical sentence from the dark Middle Ages. The monk was executed immediately, likely by hanging. The nun, however, faced a far more horrific end. She was bricked up alive within the convent walls, left to slowly die in darkness, alone and in despair. This tragic legend of the ill-fated lovers became the foundation for all the paranormal phenomena that would later occur at Borley. The ghost of the wandering nun, searching for her lost love, became the most haunting image associated with this place. And it was on this very ground, as if to challenge the restless spirits, that Borley Rectory was built. In 1862, Borley Rectory was constructed to serve as the residence for the parish rector, the Reverend Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, and his family. The house was built on the site of a former rectory that had burned down in 1841. It was a large, imposing Gothic-style structure, both stately and somewhat eerie, and was later expanded with an added wing to accommodate the Reverend Bull's large family of 14 children. But the vision of a happy home didn't last long. Around 1863, a few locals reported hearing unexplained footsteps inside the house. Reverend Bull himself was a man who held some belief in spiritualism, and often recounted seeing the ghost of a nun. It was even rumored that he built an octagonal summer house in the garden for the sole purpose of watching this ghost, and had a dining room window bricked up to prevent her from looking in on the family's meals. The most notable event occurred on July 28, 1900. 4 of the Reverend Bull's daughters saw the ghost of a nun at twilight, about 37 meters from the house. They described a figure with its head bowed as if in prayer. When one of the girls approached to speak to it, the figure vanished into thin air. The Bull sisters were all intelligent, well-educated, and well-traveled women, not the type to invent stories to impress others. Over the next 4 decades, many other people claimed to have witnessed strange events, including a phantom coach driven by 2 headless horsemen. The Reverend Henry Bull passed away in 1892, and his son, Harry Bull, took over the parish until his death in 1927, leaving Borley Rectory vacant. The house's haunted reputation was firmly established. The elder Reverend Bull had even once declared he would return to haunt the place if he was not satisfied in the afterlife. After being vacant for some time, on October 2, 1928, Borley Rectory welcomed its new occupants, the Reverend Guy Eric Smith and his wife. They had no idea that their experiences here would elevate the house's fame to a new level, capturing the attention of all of England. Soon after moving in, while cleaning out a cupboard, Mrs. Smith made a horrifying discovery. She found a brown paper package, and inside it was a human skull, believed to be that of a young woman. This gruesome discovery seemed to be the catalyst that awakened the dark forces slumbering within the house. Almost immediately, the Smith family began to report a series of bizarre phenomena. The servant bells rang, even though they were disconnected. Mysterious lights appeared in the windows of empty rooms. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the hallways and on the upper floor. Mrs. Smith also believed she saw a phantom horse-drawn carriage at night. One of the maids was so terrified by what she saw that she quit after only 2 days. Exhausted and frightened, the Smith family decided to contact the Daily Mirror newspaper, hoping to be put in touch with the Society for Psychical Research, SPR. This was the turning point that transformed Borley from a local ghost story into a national phenomenon. The newspaper sent a reporter and quickly published a series of articles detailing the mysteries of Borley Rectory, causing a stir across the country. Along with the reporter, the Daily Mirror invited a special figure, Harry Price, a paranormal researcher who was beginning to make a name for himself. Price, a former engineer, spent the time and money of his wealthy wife to delve into the supernatural world, primarily to expose psychic frauds. Price arrived at Borley on June 12, 1929, and strangely his presence seemed to stir up the supernatural activity to an unprecedented level. New phenomena, more physical and violent, began to occur. Stones, vases, and other objects were thrown by unseen forces. Price and the reporter were nearly hit by a flying candlestick. Spirit messages were tapped out from the frame of a mirror. However, there was a suspicious detail. As soon as Price left, all of these phenomena ceased. Mrs. Smith herself later confessed that she suspected Harry Price, a skilled conjurer, of having staged some of the phenomena to make the story more sensational. Whatever the truth was, the Smith family couldn't endure it any longer. They left Borley Rectory on July 14, 1929, after living there for less than a year. The house fell silent once more, but its haunted reputation had now spread throughout England, attracting hundreds of curious onlookers. Some companies even ran bus tours to see the Borley ghost. The parish had great difficulty finding a replacement. Many rectors turned down the post. The rectory was waiting for its next victims, and they came. On October 16, 1930, Borley Rectory welcomed a new family. The Reverend Lionel Algernon Foister, his young wife Mary Ann, so young she could have been his daughter, and their adopted daughter Adelaide. It was during the 5 years the Foister family lived here that the phenomena at Borley reached a climax of violence and strangeness, and the central figure of this supernatural storm was none other than Mary Ann. Reverend Foister meticulously documented all the strange events that occurred from the time they moved in until October 1935, creating a massive file that he later sent to Harry Price. According to these records, his family endured over 2,000 supernatural phenomena. Poltergeist activity was an almost daily occurrence. Windows shattered on their own, the bells started ringing again, and stones and bottles were thrown against the walls. Their daughter Adelaide was once locked in a room that had no key. But it seemed the unseen force had a special interest in Mary Ann. She reported being violently thrown from her bed. Perhaps most frightening was the appearance of mysterious writings on the walls and on scraps of paper. These scrawled, hard-to-read messages appeared to be pleas for help, desperate cries, and they often addressed Mary Ann by name. One of the most famous messages was, "Mary Ann, please help me get out." Other messages begged for rest and prayers. Faced with the escalating phenomena, Reverend Foister attempted to perform an exorcism twice, but to no avail. In the middle of the first ceremony, he was even struck in the shoulder by a fist-sized stone. However, the story during this period has a complex twist. When other investigators came to look into the case, many came to a common conclusion. Mary Ann, whether consciously or unconsciously, was the cause of the phenomena. Things became even more complicated when years later Mary Ann admitted that during her time at Borley she was having an affair with a lodger named Frank Perlis. She confessed to using the ghost stories to cover up her secret affair, explaining away suspicious noises with a lie about ghosts. This confession dealt a severe blow to the credibility of the events at Borley. However, she also stated that while some events were fabricated by her, other incidents seemed to her to be genuine supernatural phenomena. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, a complex mix of deception, genuine fear, and perhaps unexplained events. Finally, in October 1935, due to Reverend Lionel's failing health, the Foister family left Borley Rectory. They left behind a legacy of chaos, unanswered questions, and ghostly writings on the walls. The rectory was now empty once again, but its fame had spread throughout England. The house was waiting, and it was about to welcome the most famous and most controversial investigator through its doors, Harry Price. The greatest investigation was about to begin. After the Foister family left, Borley Rectory fell silent again, but its reputation did not. Harry Price, who had been following the story from the beginning, saw this as a golden opportunity. He didn't just want to investigate, he wanted to own the Borley story completely. In May 1937, Price made a bold move. He leased Borley Rectory for 1 year from its owners, Queen Anne's Bounty. The most haunted house in England had now become his private laboratory. Price did not work alone. He placed an advertisement in the Times inviting responsible persons of leisure and intelligence, intrepid, critical, and unbiased, to join a year-long round-the-clock investigation. From those who responded, he recruited a team of 48 official observers, mostly students, who would take turns staying at the rectory mainly on weekends, with the task of recording any phenomena that occurred. To ensure scientific rigor by his standards, Price issued a strict set of rules for each volunteer, recorded in a notebook he called the Blue Book. He established controlled environments inside the house. Doorways and hallways were sealed with tape or thin threads to detect any unauthorized movement. Fine powder was spread on the floors to capture footprints. He brought an impressive array of equipment, including cameras, film recorders, thermometers to measure sudden temperature changes, and even a bowl of mercury to detect the slightest vibrations. However, despite these thorough preparations, the phenomena recorded during Price's tenancy were far less dramatic than what the Foister family had experienced. Only minor events were reported, but it was during this period that a new and dramatic line of inquiry opened up. Not from within the rectory, but from a planchette séance held in Streatham, London, in March 1938. The séance was conducted by Helen Glanville, the daughter of one of Price's assistants. Price reported that through Helen they made contact with two spirits. The first identified herself as Marie Lair, a French nun who had left her order to come to England to marry a member of the noble Waldegrave family. According to the story told through the planchette, Marie was murdered in an older building on the site of Borley Rectory, and her body was either buried in the cellar or thrown down a disused well. The writings on the wall were her cries for help. The second spirit called himself Sunex Amoures. This spirit delivered a terrifying prophecy. He would burn down Borley Rectory at 9 o'clock on the night of March 27, 1938. He also claimed that at that time, the bones of a murdered person would be revealed. Although the prophecy for March 27, 1938 did not come true, the idea of a fire and hidden bones was planted in Price's mind. His investigation was coming to an end, but the story of Borley was not. The fate of the house had been sealed not by a spirit but by a worldly flame. Harry Price's lease ended and Borley Rectory got a new owner, Captain W.H. Gregson. It seems Gregson planned to turn the house into a tourist attraction, capitalizing on its haunted reputation. But his plan never came to fruition. On the night of February 27, 1939, nearly a year after the prophecy from Sunex Amoures, tragedy struck. While unpacking boxes, Captain Gregson accidentally knocked over an oil lamp in the hallway. The fire spread quickly. Since the house had no electricity or gas and water had to be drawn from a well, fighting the fire was nearly impossible. Borley Rectory was consumed by flames, leaving only a ruined shell. While the fire raged, a witness named Miss Williams from a neighboring house claimed to have seen the ghost of the nun in an upstairs window. The death of Borley Rectory was not the end of the story, at least not for Harry Price. He believed the house's final secrets still lay buried deep underground. In August 1943, Price conducted a brief excavation in the cellars of the ruined house. Here he found 2 bone fragments, believed to be those of a young woman. On May 29, 1945, a small ceremony was held. The bones, which Price described as part of a human jaw and skull, were placed in a wooden box and given a Christian burial, officially closing the story of Marie Lair, the ghost nun of Borley. Even during the demolition of the house in 1944, Price still tried to create phenomena. He attended the demolition with a photographer from Life magazine. One of the photographs taken showed a brick suspended in midair. Borley Rectory was gone, but its legacy and the controversies surrounding it were just beginning. After the death of Harry Price, another investigation was launched, not to find ghosts, but to find the truth behind the ghost hunter. Harry Price passed away in 1948, leaving behind a massive legacy in psychical research and the greatest ghost story of all time. Our next story is an equally terrifying experience about the Enfield Poltergeist. This is one of the most well-documented and controversial poltergeist cases in history, a story that inflicted terror upon an ordinary family and baffled investigators for years. It became the inspiration for the horror blockbuster The Conjuring 2 and continues to haunt British popular culture to this day. The story began in August 1977 at an ordinary semi-detached council house in Enfield, where life for the Hodgson family was quiet and somewhat difficult. Peggy Hodgson, a single mother, was struggling to raise 4 children: 13-year-old Margaret, 11-year-old Janet, 10-year-old Johnny, and 7-year-old Billy. A recent divorce had left emotional scars and financial burdens, but none of them could have imagined that a far more terrifying ordeal awaited them. It all started one evening in late August, in the back bedroom shared by Janet and Margaret. Janet, an 11-year-old girl on the cusp of puberty, seemed to be the focal point of all subsequent events. That night, as the 2 sisters were getting ready for bed, the first incidents occurred. Some sources say it was the beds moving on their own, but according to Janet's account, it started with the chest of drawers. It started in the back bedroom, Janet recalled. A chest of drawers started to shuffle. We could hear shuffling. At first, Peggy didn't believe them and thought the kids were playing tricks. Mom came up the stairs and said, "Now I want you to pack it up and stop fighting." But when she witnessed the heavy oak chest of drawers slide across the floor on its own and then tried to push it back into place but couldn't, a real fear began to creep in. She realized that something wasn't right. "And I think we was awake all that night." Ugh. The entire family endured repetitive knocking on the walls and strange little noises throughout the house that no one could explain. By the next day, Peggy was exhausted and nearly an emotional wreck. In desperation, she hastily took her children, still in their pajamas and slippers, and ran to their neighbor's house, to Vic Nottingham. Vic, a large, burly builder who feared nothing, listened to the Hodgson family's story and decided to go over and assess the situation. "I went in there, and I couldn't make out these noises," he recounted. "I went up the stairs and there was knocking on the wall in the bedroom. I passed into the next bedroom, his knock, and followed me. I was to get a little bit frightened." Vic, with his builder's experience, understood the normal sounds of a house like creaks and rats, but he insisted these knocks were unusual. While everyone was standing downstairs, the knocking echoed from the ceiling right above them, For the first time, Janet saw this big man look scared. In the end, it was Vic who advised the family to call the police. When the police arrived at 284 Green Street, they too were quickly drawn into the strange event. WPC Carolyn Heaps was one of the first official witnesses. In her statement, she witnessed an armchair move on its own. "I saw it slide off to the right about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest," she said. To check, she placed a marble on the floor to see if it would roll in the same direction. But the marble didn't move at all. She also thoroughly checked for any wires or mechanisms hidden under the chair, but could find no rational explanation. After about an hour, the police officers, despite having witnessed the event, had to admit there was nothing they could do. This wasn't a criminal case, and what was happening was beyond their ability to handle. They left, leaving the Hodgson family in a state of utter confusion and terror. In desperation, Peggy followed her neighbor's advice and called a tabloid, the Daily Mirror, hoping her story would be heard. This was the decision that brought the Enfield case to light and turned it into a media phenomenon. Reporter Douglas Bentz and photographer Graham Morris were sent to the scene. When they arrived, the atmosphere in the house was incredibly tense. The mother, Peggy, was terrified, and the children were scared. Initially, everything was quiet. But just as the journalists were preparing to leave, Vic ran out shouting that it had started again. They went back inside and witnessed a chaotic scene. "Things started flying around the room," Graham Morris recalled. "It was just chaos of people screaming. I had no idea where they came from, but they certainly didn't come from the hands of the 3 children who were present." Lego bricks and marbles flew through the air. Morris himself was hit in the forehead right above the eyebrow by a Lego brick. Despite witnessing it firsthand and even becoming a victim, a frustrating irony occurred. When Morris's photos were developed the next day, they showed nothing conclusive. This difficulty in capturing concrete evidence became one of the most contentious points of the case, leading skeptics to suggest it could have been imagination or memory influenced by the stressful environment. Feeling concerned for the safety of the Hodgson family, the Daily Mirror team contacted an organization specializing in investigating strange phenomena, the Society for Psychical Research, SPR. The first person sent was Maurice Gross, an inventor and a new member of the SPR. Gross had a deeply personal reason for getting involved in this field. He had just experienced the tragedy of losing his own daughter in an accident and believed she had tried to contact him from the other side. When he received the call about Enfield, he set off immediately. When Gross arrived, he found a family in a state of true panic. "I could see everybody was very disturbed," he said. "The children were disturbed. The mother was very disturbed." He was quickly convinced this was not a hoax. It was Gross who introduced the Hodgson family to the concept of a poltergeist, a word they had never heard before. Feeling the case was too much for him alone, Gross called for help from Guy Lyon Playfair, a writer, journalist, and experienced paranormal investigator. Playfair initially intended to stop by once or twice, but he ended up staying and investigating for the next 14 months. Together, Gross and Playfair began one of the longest and most detailed paranormal investigations ever conducted. They defined a poltergeist as a noisy spirit or mischievous, causing activities like thrown objects, knocks, bangs, bad smells, and even tremors. A common characteristic of poltergeist cases is that they often center on an individual in the house, typically an adolescent, especially girls at the onset of puberty. Janet and Margaret Hodgson fit this description perfectly. The investigators also pointed out that poltergeist cases never happen in a perfectly happy family. There is always a major upheaval, an underlying source of stress. For the Hodgson family, it was Peggy's bitter divorce and the poverty they were facing. These psychological factors for skeptics were fertile ground for attention-seeking behaviors and hoaxes. With the arrival of investigators and growing media attention, the phenomena at 284 Green Street did not subside. On the contrary, they became more violent and frightening. BBC Radio also sent a reporter and recorded mysterious knocks that sounded out right in the middle of an interview with the girls. The chair moved again, and the thumping on the walls continued to terrorize the family nightly. Gross and Playfair camped out in the house, setting up tape recorders and cameras, determined to capture undeniable proof. They had no idea that the knocks and flying objects were just the prelude. The most terrifying act at Enfield was just beginning, and its spirit was about to speak. The poltergeist activities at Enfield grew increasingly aggressive, but the most frightening and controversial turning point in the case came when the unseen force began to speak. At first, it was just the sound of a dog barking in the room, even though there was no dog. Maurice Gross, with an investigator's curiosity, challenged it. "If you can bark, maybe you can talk." And it answered. From the throat of 11-year-old Janet, a voice began to emerge. It was not the voice of a child. It was the deep, gruff, and raspy voice of an old man. The investigators tried to test the possibility of Janet faking the voice. They filled her mouth with water and then taped it shut, but the voice still spoke out strangely. Oscilloscope analysis later showed that the voice was produced by the false vocal folds, a technique that is very difficult and can cause permanent damage if used for a long time. Even more incredible, Janet could maintain this voice in conversations that lasted up to 3 hours without showing any signs of fatigue or pain. The voice identified itself as Bill Wilkins. When asked about his death, Bill replied in a chilling, guttural tone, "I went blind, then I had an hemorrhage, and I fell asleep, and I died in a chair in a corner downstairs." This was a shocking declaration. Months later, the real Bill Wilkins' son, Terry, contacted Gross. Terry confirmed every detail of the voice's account. His father, Bill Wilkins, had indeed passed away in that house, in an armchair in the living room after suffering a cerebral hemorrhage. How could an 11-year-old girl have known such precise details about the death of a stranger? This detail became one of the strongest pieces of evidence for those who believed the Enfield case was genuine. Along with the voice, the physical activities also escalated to dangerous levels. One of the most terrifying events was when the heavy cast-iron fireplace in the bedroom was torn from the wall. "It came out with such force," Playfair recounted. "Gross had to carry the pieces away the next day because they were so heavy and could have been dangerous to the family." But the most horrifying and most documented phenomenon was Janet's apparent ability to levitate. One of the most iconic images of the Enfield case is a photo sequence captured by Graham Morris with a remote-controlled camera. The series of photos shows Janet in midair, seemingly being thrown or making an impossible leap from her bed and landing on the other side of the room. Believers in the case call this evidence of levitation. Skeptics argue it was just a jump from an athletic and energetic young girl. Janet herself described the feeling as, "You feel like hands or something. You felt like you were pulled out of bed." The accounts didn't just come from inside the house. One day, a bread delivery man and a lollipop lady standing on opposite sides of the street simultaneously witnessed an unbelievable sight. They both recounted seeing Janet floating horizontally in front of her bedroom window. The lollipop lady later went home and tried to replicate the position on her own bed, but admitted it was impossible. Although eyewitness testimony can be unreliable, the coincidence of two independent observers made this phenomenon even more mysterious. Despite the incredible evidence, the Enfield case was always shrouded in skepticism. Not all members of the SPR were convinced. Psychologists Anita Gregory and John Beloff, after staying at the house, concluded that all the phenomena they witnessed were deliberate hoaxes by the children. In fact, there was undeniable proof of the children staging things. Janet was once caught hiding a tape recorder and was filmed trying to bend spoons. Years later, in an interview, Janet herself admitted that they had played tricks a few times. "Oh, once," she said, and later estimated that perhaps 2% of the events were faked. However, she adamantly insisted that the other 98% was completely real. The lead investigators like Gross and Playfair were also aware of these pranks, but they believed it was just a natural reaction from children facing a stressful situation, and didn't invalidate the authenticity of the main phenomena. The involvement of the American paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren is also a point of contention. Although the movie The Conjuring 2 portrays them as central figures according to Guy Playfair, they turned up uninvited and stayed for just one day. Playfair also stated that Ed Warren told him a lot of money could be made from the case, raising doubts about their true motives. After nearly 2 years of terror, the activities at Enfield began to diminish. Peggy, with the help of Gross and Playfair, took Janet to the Maudsley Psychiatric Hospital for testing. After 2 months of every test imaginable, doctors concluded that Janet was a completely psychologically normal girl. When she returned home, the situation seemed to have calmed down. Finally, as abruptly as they had begun, the poltergeist phenomena stopped completely. Peggy Hodgson continued to live in the house on Green Street until her death in 2003. She always maintained that even after everything stopped, there was always something there. Janet and her siblings went on to live normal lives, but the terrifying memories have haunted them forever. "It follows you. It has never left me," Janet said in a recent documentary.